So Ben is actually running an event, so he should be back at some point, but we should start with he'll be back.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything you said.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I was saying,
Do you want the mic?
can you get it?
Sure.
It's not wireless.
No.
I'll just speak louder.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So the first speaker in the afternoon session, Ben, he is running an event, so he will be back soon, hopefully, but we are going to start without him, and hopefully he'll be back. So, yeah, I've actually never done one of these things. So I think I'll just invite questions from the audience, but I want to start before that just to make a comment that I was really moved by that apple picture, the one apple on the side. Ted was my neighbor, so I was discussing with him what that apple would mean. And we were all actually confused because we were like, oh, the apple had come from the other side, but no, it's like this, so it's not rolled over to the other side. But then later you said the single apple is reflective of quality. I think that's what you said on the Japanese side.
Yeah, I mean, the apple is often a symbol of like education, and
Yeah.
in this case, of course, it also had a dual purpose of like apple falling off the tree. And,
Yes.
I think there are probably multiple ways.
The way I thought of it after you said that is that it's reflective of the quality of our education system, that we only end up having one apple that survives after all. So that was really moving.
And also the swing is broken and
Yeah.
someone's obviously fallen off.
Right.
I was kind of interested that you say that. But, I mean, it's clear that the idea was that it was something darker, clearly. But at the same time, for me, initially, and I think that's what Ivan was referring to, I thought that was the fruit of the process. You have to go through the hardship or something. But then, and also I happen to like the Starry Night, so
Yes.
there's nothing that negative about that, right?
Yes.
But on the other hand, there's a certain sadness to the fact that the fruit has fallen and no one picked it up. It's just down on the ground. So, yeah.
There's also, you may not notice this in the picture, but there's the plus, times, minus, divide on the tree. And it was intentional that the division and the subtraction on the dark side.
The inverse.
The start, the inside.
Do people in the audience have any questions, comments?
This isn't completely well formed, but I do try to provide some of these projects, assignments to my students where they have a chance to reflect or to create art or like an invite to write for journaling. I always have a hard time assessing this. I provide feedback, but it feels weird grading someone's art or someone's ideas. And sometimes you can tell a student really put a lot of thought and effort into it, and really got into it, and then other ones, maybe they didn't so much for this project, and they did it for a different one, and maybe that's okay. I don't know, how do you see that? Like, I don't think not being able to grade effort should make you not do this, but it also feels a little weird of like, am I grading it just for completion, like just checking the box?
Yes,
It's a weird
yes.
box.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so one of the reasons that I provided a rubric for my students is so they could see for themselves what they were aiming for. And it's not the perfect rubric, and I know probably people in this audience have done even more work to try to figure out, like, what are you really looking for in a piece of work? And of course, with art, it's even maybe a little harder because none of us feel qualified to judge art, but we're only interested in the idea, right? So not the actual quality of the art. So I do say, like, hey, in this case, the communication shines in some way, right? And then the other levels were my attempt to try to allow the student to assess themselves. And so that's one thing that you could do, for instance. I don't remember if I did in this class, but with other assignments where I ask them to do reflection. I have sometimes asked them to assess themselves in various ways, right? Assess the quality of the reflection.
I have students in some of my classes actually read Francis's book, and the assignment for them is to write a personal reflection of about a page on each chapter. So we do a chapter a week. And I grade that purely on completion, but completion means it shows that they've read the book and they've thought about it and processed something about it. So that's not the depth that we're talking about, but all I'm looking for is that I want them thinking.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that if you just say, you're looking for evidence of active engagement with the reading material or whatever it is, well, 10 points, yes, let's do it. Like, don't sweat it. And then, sometimes I'd say, 9 points. So, like, if I say, in order to get 10 points, you have to show active engagement with the reading. If they don't hit it, then I don't feel bad about giving them 9 points or 8 points or whatever. But usually I'm getting mostly 10s, and that's okay. Like, we have to get away from the idea that the assessment is all about being summative, right? A lot of it's just formative. It's just the process of having them engage with it. And I'm not so worried about fine gradations.
Oh, I want to echo that. Maybe one who's teaching now at the high school level, and so more subject, let's say, to the grades. I'm lucky because in the school that I teach, we don't have traditional grades, and in fact, we're contemplating moving altogether away from grades. We have a system called standards-based grading that some colleges use, but in our version, and we've had, and I had to educate myself with this and sort of come up with my own way of making it work. For my classes, self-assessment is a big deal for me. I usually, in each of my classes, I create a grid of learning outcomes, which are active. The cells in the grid is a 9x3 grid, where those are active. Each cell has a verb, basically, an action that is understandable without any technical terms, that they would know even before they take the class, and they know this, and if that's part of the syllabus, that's what they should want to kind of accomplish, including, one of the learning outcomes is communication, and you go from articulating clearly an idea to making a convincing argument to demonstrating skepticism and stimulating conversation, whatever. So there's a progression towards, deepening on the idea, and this collaboration is another one. So it's not just technical things. There are some technical things, but they're pretty high level. And I let them self-assess on it. I give them feedback on it. I assess them as well on that. And I also, you saw a little bit, usually interspersed, so rather than having one final thing at the end, they usually have final sort of, I guess they're not really summative, they're more formative in the sense that they're happening throughout, but they're basically showing snapshots of their portfolio of learning artifacts as they create them every month or so, every 6 weeks maybe. And the intent, their audience isn't me, their audience is their peers. And so there's a survey that I co-designed with other teachers, which the audience get to fill out. And the questions there are 4 questions where they have to say whether the talk made them, realize something new that they didn't think about before, or make them talk to someone else about an idea or something like that, right? And then they have to say one thing that they wish they knew more about as a result of the talk. And, sort of something like that, basically. And so that whole package, including the self-assessment, this survey from the audience, and my assessment of them, in the same format, come together to be kind of their assessment. So, I think too often we let the grades determine what we teach rather than the other way around.
I'd like to address the question earlier. I think you asked about what are some tangible ideas for how to be compassionate and natural to your teaching. And I think one of the important things that helps me is, there's some students that just are frustrated, right? They're, for whatever reason, they've always got something going on, or they're, whatever it might be. And I I try to approach every interaction with a student with the question in my head, how can I help? Just those words change my thought about how I'm going to react to the student in this moment. That doesn't mean I don't hold them accountable. It doesn't mean I soften requirements necessarily, but that I find helps center me in what this person in front of me is learning, and possibly in spite of whatever challenges they have going on in their lives. On her way out, Mercedes Franco was here. She's at CUNY Queensborough, a community college in New York City, in the CUNY system. And she was talking about how frequently students don't engage in class because they're just trying to put food on the table. They have to work so many hours just to survive that their intent is to be a good student, but they just really don't have the opportunity to do that. And to look at a situation like that and just think, how can I help? Can I refer them to other resources they can use? Can I, do an online office hours at a time when they're not working? There's no right answer to the question, but just keeping that question in mind, I find very powerful.
Oh, is it okay? I have a question for you. Do you have a tangible example of like a specific mathematical idea that you feel like you've been able to connect with someone in the art person initiative, whatever, by teaching or having them learn in a certain way that might be different from a way that a way that itself feels like that's a venue for compassion and might be a change of pace from what they might have otherwise seen. I think I'm trying to make this a little bit more tangible idea that I think she was asking about.
Well, I'll have to think. Nothing comes to mind immediately about the prison students,
or in a different
but from a
class,
different environment.
Yeah, that's
I taught a course last spring called Learning Math with Understanding. And many of the people that took this class were people who knew they needed a math class, but had all those fears and things, all those anxieties about math, and this looked like something approachable. And then many of them were also people who were intending to be teachers. So we spent actually 2 or 3 weeks taking apart what fractions mean, and starting with what's a unit fraction. And that a fraction is not a pie that's cut into 8 slices and you took 3 pieces out of 8, but that 3/8 is really 3 pieces of a unit, and a unit is called 1/8. And that fractions are numbers that are just between whole numbers, and taking a very different approach to what fractions were. And at first, there were some students who were not engaged with that approach, but very quickly, they really got it. It was so powerful for them about, why didn't they teach us this way in 3rd grade? Which, good question, but I'm not going to disparage your 3rd grade teacher who might not have had the resources or knowledge to really teach it this way. I had one student who was literally in my arms crying at the end of the 1st class. And she was a master's student in philosophy. But she was taking this, and she can't do this. And all of a sudden, when we took apart multi-digit multiplication as being the repeated application of the distributive law, and we built up to that. So I had them do multiplication in whatever way makes sense, and they all came up with all these different ways. And the one rule I gave them is you can't use any step you can't justify. So if the step is you carry the 3, and you can't explain why you carry the 3, you can't do it. And they shared their strategies with each other. And then we talked about how all the strategies were the same thing. You had these 10s and you had these 1s, and you can, take them apart. And there's this thing called the distributive law of multiplication over addition. It's not of anything over anything else. And we talked about what that means. And really, by taking it down to its very basic level, it was really empowering for them, and the light went off for a lot of them. Now, There are many campuses where math faculty would not let you teach that for college credit. Right? And this is a struggle that we have in elementary teacher education in particular, is that in many campuses, they're required to take a certain amount of mathematics. But if you're going to teach second grade math and you don't really understand what a fraction is, calculus is not what you need. And this is an argument that goes on in many math departments, that but you can't give credit for spending weeks on ratio and proportion. But they need it, and it's very deep. And I could give you some ratio and proportion problems that many of you would sort of be going, that's an interesting way to think about it, right? And it is more deep than we give it credit for. There is some real mathematics underneath there, multiplicative thinking and linear growth and things like that you can all tie together in a sophisticated way. So by giving them control over, here's a real world problem, you have this many baskets of apples and this many apples in each basket. And that's not even that real world, but it's at least something people know what it means. Show me how you'd figure out how many apples you have altogether. And that was a homework assignment. Which actually brings to mind another compassion practice that I keep trying, is I try to take the word homework out of my vocabulary, because my incarcerated students do not go home. And they object to that terminology. And then I realize on a main campus, I don't know who goes home either. So I've been trying to say out of class assignments.
Also to add to that, I've shifted to doing a lot of what previously would be homework in class. So to shift, I mean, in some places, both in the classroom, so that I do give for roughly 4 weeks in a modular way, the material ahead of time to the students in terms of, I mean, I do give them some real-time lectures, but they have all the slides ahead of time, they have the readings ahead of time, they can paste them so they have videos about them and so on. And much like 60–70% of the class time in my case is spent with students working in small groups and me sort of going around and observing. That's how I can have videos. And so, it's changed my practice. It's changed also with respect to what you said. We don't teach, we facilitate, right? They learn, right? But we facilitate. And if you think about it, I wonder what you guys think about it, but over the years, as I grew older, I realized that this is what my best teachers ever did. I always learned by myself, but they inspired me to learn. They made it worth my while to spend the time that I needed to spend to learn this stuff, right? And they gave me resources when I didn't know where to look for resources. But ultimately, it wasn't that they taught me in some active way. I did I taught myself.
Fundamentally, learning is something that happens inside your brain.
Right.
But however it gets there.
It's subjective. It's not,
Yeah. So another response to that question, or what are some tangible things, is calling things by their real names of what they mean. So I never say carry the 3. I say regroup the 30 tens, the 31s into 3 tens. And it takes a little longer to say, but you do it every single time, the distributive property of multiplication over addition. Now that's at a lower level, but in this class about math for understanding, I had one student, we don't have majors at Sarah Lawrence, so someone who would have been a math major, I guess, at another school, asked me, can we talk about what a derivative means? And what really is a function? And I thought, seriously? And I'm not faulting him, but he went through all these years of education, and he knew how to do it all, but didn't know what it was. When I taught Introduction to Proofs this past semester, I had students still talking about inputs and outputs instead of domain and range. And because they've been given these fake vocabulary words without even knowing what they really are. And that's not to say they need to throw out those words. Input and output has an intuitive meaning to many of them. We're talking about a function. But to teach them, it's almost like being multilingual. Let's translate that language that works for you into formal mathematical language, because now we need it to mean something very specific. So I think that's one practice that's been really helpful, is to be very specific about, when you write down the derivative, I say the function that is the derivative of that function, right? That the derivative of a function is another function.
Let me say something here, and at least I'll push back. No, I do agree with what you said, but I think something that isn't said enough, and I think this would be an occasion to program it, is that, in my opinion, way too often in math classes across the university as well as lower levels, we teach things whose need has not arisen before the need arises, so way out of context. There's no evidence, in fact there's a lot of negative evidence about the pedagogical value of that. But like, we don't learn that way. We're not computers to just accumulate, memory. It sounds fair. Area of our brain, it'll fly out. Even if we memorize it for some reason, forget a test, it won't mean anything. So unless we wait or you curate situations where some need arises, for example, the need for rigor, sure, I completely agree. This is exactly what somebody is missing in our classes, the acknowledgement of the translation, the acknowledgement of the distinction between what we say and what we mean, and the need to translate, between colloquial speech or even the speech in one form, like in geometry as opposed to in algebra or whatever. Absolutely. But first, let's even create because we often say math is a language. But if it is to be a language, you have to have stories to tell in that language. What is it and why? It won't be a language if you have nothing to say in it. So,
It's kind of the distinction between a problem and an exercise. An exercise is something you practice. A problem is something to be solved. And what you're talking about of the need arising is identifying the problem first as a way to get people solved.
then we do the exercises and then models.
Right.
I'm having a very strong emotional moment. Let me try to explain why. I'm a retiree. I took Algebra 2 in high school. And in March of last year, marked my engagement with compassionate math. I met Irfin. I live in Philadelphia. He was at the University of Pennsylvania. And he introduced me to the Zoom group that TED facilitates weekly. When I joined the group, my main question was, how does mathematical practice affect the mathematician? And that question has been answered over the course of our discussions. What's touched my heart is the presentation here has answered the question more than I could ever imagine. In the Zoom discussions, the group talks about doing math. And what I was blessed with in our session is that you show what math is doing to you. And I saw a t-shirt years ago that said math is radical, and math is inspirational. And after listening to the presentation so far, I see the fundamental, which is what radical means. It means to go to the very root. And my takeaway from our discussion is, I see what compassionate math is by what it's done to you and your practice as teachers, researchers, and educators. And Ben's presentation just totally blew me away. I almost just leapt up and hugged him after the presentation, so I followed him out, and I said, yeah, I hug you. And the other fundamental nature, radical nature of math, as per his presentation, was its definitive way of defining the new community and human transformation. So when you talk about the story and why you do math, that's the story. It's the story of transformation, relationship, society, and so forth. So I can't talk you enough, and I'm going to give you my
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sharon.
We have one more.
Yeah, we run a program in Detroit for middle school and high school kids. I just have two thoughts about compassion. There was a concern that we're not all compassionate people, so how do we bring that? And the way we solved that was we went from a program that kind of centered ourselves around compassion to a program that centered ourselves around kindness. Compassion is something that you have inside, or maybe you feel like you don't. But kindness is something that you can show to every kid, and every person can do that. And that really helped with all the people who were working with our kids to feel more comfortable with the program, more able to deliver that compassion. And the second thing is that we found ourselves working with kids, being transformed. This is over 30 years, from a mathematics program that teaches kids to a kids program that teaches mathematics. And then compassion comes easily, as we say, actually love comes easily because that's your show, not the math. So it's like, okay, we got to provide a safe place for kids, a breakfast, a hug when a kid needs a hug, a smile, so that the most important position in the program is the director of humor, who every day brings a joke or something crazy and has, could be math or no math at all, but just make a child smile. And then the mathematics comes easily, in a compassionate way.
Yeah, I have a colleague who says he doesn't teach math, he teaches people.
I think that's a great way to end our discussion.
Thank
We
you.
should start next.